Today, we're going deep on the American dream.
Oh, okay.
But not the kind you see on those posters with like a, picket
Right,
fence.
right.
This is going to be way more interesting. We're looking at how this whole concept has shifted and changed based on a really cool book called Dream State by Eric Puchner.
Oh, yeah, this book.
Yeah, you familiar with it?
It's been getting a lot of buzz. Oprah picked it for her book club.
Yeah, that's right. So we wanted to really get into it.
Yeah.
So the basic premise is that it follows a bunch of different characters all trying to figure out, what success means to them.
Right, and it's not just like the typical rags to riches story.
Like the old school version, yeah.
It's way more nuanced.
Okay, so it's like a modern take on the classic theme.
Exactly. It's like Puchner is looking at the American dream through the lens of today's world with all its anxieties and hopes.
Yeah, it's so different now than it was even a generation ago.
Totally. And by showing us all these different characters, he's really highlighting how subjective success can be. Like what might look like making it to one person could be totally different for someone else.
I like that. It's not like a one-size-fits-all definition.
Right. So, for example, there's this one character, a lawyer, who on the surface seems to have it all, right? The successful career, the family, the big house. But her drive for success, her ambition, it comes at a price. Her relationships are strained. She's not really happy. And it kind of makes you question that whole idea of chasing after this, picture-perfect life. Does it actually lead to fulfillment?
Right. It's like, is all that really worth it if you're miserable?
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions Puchner seems to be asking. Like, what if there isn't one single definition of success that works for everyone?
Whoa. Okay, so this is getting deep. I mean, we're already so used to measuring success by those external things, like how much money someone makes or their job title or...
Totally Dream State challenges all that. It's saying that real fulfillment might be found in something way more personal, something that lines up with your own values and aspirations.
Okay, so not just the big house and the fancy car.
Not necessarily. It's more about figuring out what matters to you, what makes you feel successful.
I'm digging this already. It seems so relatable, like everyone's on their own path.
Exactly, and that's what makes the book so interesting. It acknowledges that there's no one right way to make it.
Right, and that's where the whole multiple perspectives thing comes in.
Exactly. Like there's another character, a struggling artist, whose dream isn't about material wealth at all. It's about, creative expression, making art that matters.
Oh, that's cool. It's like finding meaning in your work, whatever that work is.
Totally. So you see how different these characters' ideas of success are.
Yeah, that's got to make for a really good read.
It does. And Puchner doesn't just tell you about these different perspectives. He lets them play out. You see how their ambitions affect their relationships, their sense of self-worth, their happiness.
So he's painting this picture of all the different ways ambition can play out in a person's life.
Exactly. And it's not always pretty,
I can imagine, but it's probably honest too.
Definitely. He's not sugarcoating anything.
Okay, so I gotta ask, what's his writing style like? Is it super serious and academic, or...?
Actually, no. It's really engaging. One of the things I was surprised by was how funny it is.
Oh, really? Like laugh out loud funny?
Well, maybe not laugh out loud, but definitely witty and clever. He manages to keep things interesting even when he's dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, like economic uncertainty and...
Yeah, the world can be a pretty crazy place these days.
Right. But Puchner finds a way to balance the serious stuff with humor, which makes it a much more enjoyable read.
That's cool. I like books that can make you think and feel at the same time.
Me too. It's a good mix.
Okay, so we've talked about individual characters and his writing style, but does the book ever zoom out and look at society as a whole?
It does. It definitely tackles some bigger picture stuff too, generational differences, economic anxiety, the way values in society are changing.
Yeah, it feels like everything's shifting so fast these days.
It is, and the book reflects that. There's this one subplot about a father who feels like he's totally lost touch with his millennial kids. He doesn't get their values or their priorities.
That's so real. Every generation goes through that, right? Like kids these days.
Exactly. But it feels even more pronounced now with everything changing so rapidly.
Yeah, with globalization technology, it's like a whole new world.
Totally. And Dream State captures all that. It's like a snapshot of what it's like to try and figure things out in this crazy modern world.
So it's not just a story, it's like a commentary on society too.
Exactly. It's making us look at ourselves and our values and ask some tough questions.
Okay, so this is starting to sound pretty heavy. But is there any hope in the book? Or is it all doom and gloom?
Oh, there's definitely hope. It's not all bad. While Puchner acknowledges the challenges, he also offers a more optimistic message. He seems to be saying that true fulfillment might come from redefining success on our own terms.
So finding our own version of the American dream.
Exactly. It's not about following some predetermined path. It's about figuring out what matters to you and going after that. even if it's different from what everyone else expects.
I like that. It's like a message of empowerment,
Totally. Like you have the power to create your own happiness.
Okay, so we've talked about the individual struggles in the book and the bigger societal context, but you mentioned earlier that Puchner also explores how ambition can affect family relationships. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's a really important part of the book, too, that shows how the pursuit of success can sometimes create tension and distance between family members, like parents and children, siblings, even married couples.
It's interesting because we often think of ambition as this positive thing, like it's all about individual achievement, but we don't always consider how it might impact the people around us.
Exactly, and Puchner doesn't shy away from that. He shows how ambition can sometimes lead to unintended consequences.
Like what, for example?
Well, remember that lawyer character I mentioned earlier, the one who seems to have it all?
Yeah.
Well, her relationship with her teenage daughter is really strained. The daughter feels neglected, like her mom cares more about her work than about her.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, and the mom, she's struggling to find balance. She wants to be successful in her career, but she also loves her daughter. It's like she's torn between these two different parts of her life.
That's gotta be tough. It's like a classic dilemma, right? Trying to juggle everything.
It is, and Puchner portrays it in a really realistic way. You see both sides of the story. You understand where both characters are coming from.
It sounds like he's not trying to judge anyone. He's just presenting these complex situations and letting the reader draw their own conclusions.
Exactly. He's more interested in exploring the nuances of human experience than in offering easy answers.
And that's probably what makes the book so thought-provoking.
Exactly. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued. Now, I heard that Puchner has a really unique way of telling the story in this book, something about playing with time and perspective.
Oh yeah, he does. It's pretty cool. He doesn't just stick to a linear timeline. He jumps back and forth.
Oh, really? So it's not just a straightforward beginning, middle, and end?
No, it's way more dynamic than that.
Interesting. So, like, how does that work?
Well, for example, he might show us a scene from one character's perspective, and then later he'll revisit that same scene, but from a different character's point of view.
So it's like we're getting multiple layers of the same story.
Exactly. And each layer adds something new. It's like he's slowly revealing the full picture piece by piece.
That sounds really cool, but also kind of challenging. Like, how do you keep track of everything?
Well, that's the beauty of it. Puchner is a master storyteller. He handles it in a way that feels really natural and effortless. You never feel lost or confused.
Okay, so it's like a puzzle, but a really well-designed puzzle.
Exactly. And it's so rewarding when you start to see how all the pieces fit together.
I'm starting to get why this book is generating so much buzz. It sounds like it's really pushing the boundaries of storytelling.
It is, and it's definitely one of the most thought-provoking books I've read in a while.
Well, I'm definitely adding it to my reading list, but before we wrap up for today, I'm curious to hear more about how this whole time-jumping thing actually works in practice. Like, what are some specific examples?
Oh, sure. Well, for instance, there's this one scene where a character makes this huge decision that changes their life completely.
Wow, big stakes.
Yeah. And we first see it from their perspective, so we understand why they made the choice they did.
Okay.
But then later, Puchner takes us back to that same moment. But this time we see it through the eyes of someone else. Someone who was affected by that decision.
Whoa, so it's like we're getting the whole story, not just one side of it.
Exactly. And it's so powerful because it makes you realize that there are always multiple perspectives to every story, and that our actions can have consequences that we might not even be aware of.
That's so true. We often only see things from our own limited point of view.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to try to understand other people's perspectives.
Yeah, it's like that saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Exactly. And Dream State really helps you do that. It makes you think about the world in a more empathetic way.
Okay, so we're starting to see how this time-jumping technique really adds depth to the story. But how does it connect to the book's overall themes of ambition and the American dream?
Well, I think it highlights the idea that there's no single right way to achieve the American dream or even to define it in the first place. It's all subjective, and it depends on your individual experiences and perspectives.
Right, so it's not about following some predetermined formula. It's about figuring out what works for you.
Exactly. And the book really emphasizes that there's no right or wrong answer.
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
Exactly. It's about figuring out who you are, what you want, and then having the courage to go after it.
I love that. It's such a hopeful message.
It is, and it's a message that I think we all need to hear sometimes, especially in today's world where there's so much pressure to conform and to follow the crowd.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in what everyone else is doing and forget to listen to our own inner voice.
Totally. And Dream State reminds us that it's okay to be different, to forge our own paths and to define success on our own terms.
This has been such a great conversation. I'm already feeling inspired to pick up this book and dive in myself. But before we go, I have to ask, what would you say to someone who's maybe hesitant to read a book that deals with such potentially heavy topics?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I'd say that. I'd say that even though it deals with some serious stuff, Dream State is ultimately a hopeful book. And it's really well written, so it never feels like a chore to read.
Yeah, that's important. Like, you don't want to feel like you're reading a textbook.
Exactly. It's more like you're having a conversation with a really insightful friend.
I like that. And you mentioned earlier that the characters are relatable.
Oh yeah, definitely. They feel like real people with real problems and real dreams.
So it's not just about abstract ideas, it's about how those ideas play out in the lives of people we can connect with.
Exactly, and that's what makes the book so compelling. You find yourself rooting for these characters even when they make mistakes.
Which they probably do plenty of.
Oh yeah, they're not perfect by any means, but that's what makes them so human.
I'm sold. Okay, so back to this whole time jumping thing. Can you give me a specific example of how it works in the book?
Sure. So there's this one scene where a character is faced with a really tough decision. It's like a crossroads in their life.
Okay.
And we see that scene from their perspective first. So we understand their thought process, their motivations, why they made the choice they did.
Gotcha.
But then later on in the book, Puchner takes us back to that same scene. But this time we see it from a different character's point of view, someone who was also there, but who experienced it in a totally different way.
Wow, so it's like we're getting both sides of the story.
Exactly. And it's so cool because it makes you realize that there's always more to the story than what we see on the surface.
It's like there's the truth, and then there's everyone's individual perception of the truth.
Right. And that's what Puchner is so good at capturing. He shows us how our own biases and experiences can shape our understanding of events.
And that's got to make for some pretty interesting character dynamics.
It does. It adds a whole layer of complexity to the relationships between the characters.
I can imagine. So this time jumping thing, it's not just a gimmick, it's actually serving a purpose.
Oh, definitely. It's a really clever way to explore the book's themes of ambition and success. It shows how those concepts can be interpreted in so many different ways, depending on your perspective.
And it probably makes you question your own assumptions about those things.
Totally. It's like Puchner's holding up a mirror and saying, hey, take a look at yourself and how you view the world.
That's deep. I like it. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that the book also touches on the idea that ambition isn't always a positive force. That kind of blew my mind because we're always told to follow our dreams and reach for the stars. But what if those dreams turn out to be not so great after all?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Ambition can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can drive us to achieve great things, but on the other hand, it can also lead us down some pretty dark paths.
So it's like anything else in life. It's all about balance.
Exactly. Too much of anything could be a bad thing. And Dream State really explores that idea. It shows how unchecked ambition can sometimes lead to obsession and even destruction.
Yikes. So it's like a cautionary tale in a way.
In a way, yeah. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's more about encouraging us to be mindful of our ambitions, to make sure they're aligned with our values, and that we're not sacrificing our well-being or our relationships in the process.
Right. So it's not about giving up on our dreams. It's about pursuing them in a healthy way.
Exactly, and about being aware of the potential costs.
Okay, so we've talked about the downsides of ambition, but what about the personal cost? You mentioned earlier that the lawyer character has a strained relationship with her daughter. Are there other examples in the book of how ambition can take a toll on people's lives?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's this one subplot about two brothers who have completely different political views.
Oh boy, that's always a recipe for disaster.
Right, and their ambition, in this case, it's their ambition to be right to prove the other one wrong. It ends up driving a wedge between them.
It's like their political beliefs become more important than their relationship as brothers.
Exactly. And it's heartbreaking to watch because you can see how much they love each other, but they just can't seem to bridge the gap between their ideologies.
Like, that's happening all over the world right now. People are so divided. It's scary.
It is. And Dream State captures that perfectly. It shows how our ambitions, even when they seem noble, can sometimes blind us to what's really important.
So it's like a commentary on our current political climate, too.
In a way, yeah. But it's also a reminder that even in the midst of all the chaos and division, there's still hope for connection and understanding.
Well, that's good to hear, because I was starting to get a little depressed.
No, it's not all bad. I promise the book does offer some hope.
Okay, good. So it's not just a downer.
No, it's more like a wake-up call. It's making us confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and about society, but it's doing it in a way that feels thought-provoking and even inspiring.
I like that. It's like it's challenging us to be better.
Exactly. And to think more critically about the choices we make.
This is making me really want to read this book. But I have to ask, for someone who's maybe a little intimidated by all these big ideas, what would you say to encourage them to give Dream State a try?
Well, I'd say that, first of all, don't be intimidated. This book is actually a really enjoyable read.
Yeah, like you said before, it's not a textbook, it's a story.
Right. And Puchner is such a talented writer. He makes these big ideas accessible and even fun to think about.
So it's not like you need a PhD to understand it.
No, not at all. It's a book for anyone who's ever thought about what it means to live a good life. You know?
Yeah, like, what are we all doing here? What's the point of it all?
Exactly. And I think Dream State offers some really insightful answers to those questions. Or at least it makes you think about them in a new way.
Well, that's what a good book could do, right? Make you think.
Exactly. And this one definitely does that. But it also does it in a way that feels entertaining and engaging, not preachy or boring.
So it's a good balance of substance and style.
Right. And I think that's why it's resonating with so many people.
I can see that. So to wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you hope listeners will get from this deep dive into Dream State?
That's a good question. I guess I'd say that the American dream, it's not a one-size-fits-all concept.
Right. It's not just about the white picket fence and the 2.5 kids anymore.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced and personal than that.
So it's really about finding your own version of the dream.
Exactly. And about having the courage to pursue it, even if it looks different from what everyone else is doing.
I love that. It's a message of hope and individuality.